I'm Crystal Manich, and I am the stage director for The Marriage of Figaro.
Welcome, Crystal. Welcome back to Bloomington.
Thank you.
What is The Marriage of Figaro about, and what previous work is it based upon?
The Marriage of Figaro is based on a play of the same name by Beaumarchais, who was writing in pre-revolutionary France. And it is the sequel to his play The Barber of Seville, which is an opera that was composed after Mozart's time, but they are of course linked because of the connection with a lot of same characters, and the story kind of evolves in The Marriage of Figaro in a very different way. And it's, Beaumarchais wrote it to be a story about what the lower classes were capable of and how they were smarter and much more connected to the real world than the upper class. And of course, him being a pre-revolutionary writer, I think that it's safe to say that he really helped the French Revolution get going. He was very involved politically. So the opera does a fantastic job of really putting the servant at the forefront, and that of course is Figaro, who helped the Count conquer his wife, as it were, in The Barber of Seville, and the barber being Figaro himself, but now he's a servant in the Count's palazzo. And we are in southern Spain. But the opera, of course, is in Italian, as was the customary way to write operas at the time, and very popular in Mozart's time to write only in Italian. Through the course of the first act, we come to find out that the Count has supposedly renounced his right as a feudal lord to be able to have the wife of a servant before they get married. But in this case, he has abolished it, but now he wants to reinstate it because he wants to have a night with Figaro's soon-to-be bride, Susanna. And while on its face value, it sounds awful and really cynical to have that be sort of the crux of what the opera's about, but the way that it's exposed and the way that it's expressed is in comedic fashion. And that's what makes The Marriage of Figaro the perfect play, and therefore the perfect opera, because it hits so many notes of deep emotional connection, but also comedy. And as you see the upper class kind of in the Count keep messing up and actually look like more of a buffoon than his servant. And in the end, of course, everything turns out fine, and the Count realizes the error of his ways as the Countess, his wife, forgives him for everything that's happened. But it does have a lot of roots from the Commedia dell'arte tradition, from Italian theater, and it really is one of the most perfect operas.
You mentioned Beaumarchais being a pre-revolutionary. I think there's an apocryphal quote by Napoleon about Beaumarchais' original play, something to the effect of, if the revolution hasn't begun, it sure has in this play.
Absolutely, and and even when Mozart it was controversial for Mozart to write an opera based on this play, because the play had a lot of controversy around it.
What makes this a good show for a first-time opera patron?
Mozart is a fantastic introduction for anyone into the opera world. I am constantly reminded every time I direct a Mozart. It's not until I get in the room where I remind myself, like, wow, this is, the music is astounding, and to be able to direct a show that has music that is really so dramatically perfect for the situation. Mozart knows how to write irony in his music that contrasts the libretto text, or he also has a penchant for writing music that directly coincides with the text. And he actually therefore creates subtext in a time in the 18th century before the word subtext was even known or thought about, because we weren't yet in the 19th century. And so I think that's what makes the opera feel so alive, is the way that he paints characters, and I think that people will automatically connect to all these characters. They are archetypes similar to the Commedia dell'arte. You can probably identify who is who right away based on what their voice type is, how they sing their music, and the colloquial way that Da Ponte is writing this text. It's sort of taking Beaumarchais' French text and making in the Italian. It's so funny when you hold them side by side. They are very similar, but Da Ponte is able to find rhyme schemes that you're just astounded by how he could find these two words that are so perfectly placed to rhyme with one another. So I think in that way it's a very accessible opera. Mozart's very accessible, and I really encourage people to come see it for that reason.
Speaking of Lorenzo da Ponte, what was so significant about his relationship as a librettist with Mozart, and why did they hit it off so well?
Da Ponte had he's a brilliant writer. If you know Don Giovanni and Così fan tutte, which was their last collaboration together, I mean, I think Così, it's so interesting how people are very conflicted about whether Così is a good opera or not, and I think it's brilliant. I've done it several times, and it's really in Così that you see Da Ponte's true genius come out, because one can look at the Marriage of Figaro and say, well, he just took the Beaumarchais text and just massaged it, but actually, even in the Marriage of Figaro, you see where he is able to create wit and emotion through the writing, and I think that's what made him such a great collaborator with Mozart, and Mozart is able to take text and really paint them in the way that I've described, where you can really create any kind of atmosphere with the way that he writes music, and I think that that's what made them such great collaborators.
You're obviously fond of Mozart's writing. What about his music stimulates your own creativity as a director? I
hear everything he wants me to hear. That's how I feel Mozart. I mean, I think a lot of directors would agree that, a little run in the orchestral that doesn't have any singing on it can tell you so much about what action needs to happen, whether someone's running across the stage, whether it's or walking, the pace of someone walking. If you recall the opening of Don Giovanni, Leporello is pacing in front of Donna Anna's palazzo, waiting for Giovanni to come out of her room, and you hear it in the music, his pacing, because he's really frustrated that his master is taking a long time, and he's tired of doing these things for his master. So I feel like there are so many examples of that in the Mozart, and I've been pointing this out to the students who are doing such a great job interpreting this work, and I've seen a huge growth in both casts as we've been going. But I say, listen to that texture. Right now it's only on piano, but in the orchestra it's this instrument or it's this, and maestro, remind us of what that instrument is, because a flute, a violin, a bass, it all can inform what's happening and who that gesture belongs to, and so I really capitalize on that, and I just hear it, and I think Mozart just tries to make it very clear as to what people should be doing in terms of their body.
Yeah, he's a real genius of temporal quality.
Yes. Yeah.
Figaro on its face can be seen as somewhat madcap, maybe hysterical. As a director, where do you find that balance between the opera buffa and those real kind of tender, sincere moments between the characters or among the characters, and how do you strike that balance in the action?
I think the biggest misnomer about comedic works, whether they're plays or operas, is that somehow the comedy is disconnected from reality, or that the comedy is somehow not a serious moment to be taken by the actors on stage. And I think that actually it's the opposite. I've been trying to talk to the casts about comedy is only funny when the character takes something really seriously, that then we react, wow, that's like such a silly thing that they just did. And so I think, and then when the dramatic moments happen, they land in the opposite way of comedy, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. As long as the character is committed and the actor is committed to the intention that has to happen, I think that that's when comedy really scintillates, because comedy in Mozart is going to be very different from comedy in, say, a Feydeau farce or something, where it is the situation and how the characters react to the situation that is really going to sell that. And I think that there's really no difference in how you play comedy versus drama, except for timing. In comedy, you always have to have a certain timing. It usually happens in threes, which we've been talking about a lot in rehearsal, and which is also, completed gesture and things like that. So I really think that great comedy comes out of a really dramatically connected character.
And furthermore, leaning into that a little bit, how do you help alleviate some of the convoluted nature or the circuitous nature of this plot? How do you get the audience to tag along and at least try to hang onto the plot?
There are lots of elements of the Marriage of Figaro that are in the plot that are very confusing or could be confusing, and there's like keys and letters and hiding and who knows what at this moment. And in rehearsal we have to talk about those things, and sometimes I go, wait, oh no, that already happened, because it's about the continuity of and where each character is at any given moment. You have to remind yourself, okay, this person doesn't know this yet, so we can't have him see this, right? And that's all about clarity. I really, in general, my philosophy is that a director should direct with clarity, even in an abstract piece. That also applies, but it's just the way that it's executed in Mozart. I think it has to be built on timing and physical action, and making sure that the audience understands what's happening visually. If you direct it visually so that it could be understood, then I'm convinced that people don't have to read surtitles. I'm always directing for people who don't want to read the surtitles, actually, because I think that clarity of focus on stage is really what people will latch on to, and then when they read the surtitles, it'll even add more to their understanding. So I always want people to understand what's happening in the plots of these operas.
Oh, that's brilliant. What do you enjoy about the physical elements of this production from Opera de Montreal? We've brought it here to IU before. It's a magnificent set, of course.
I love the floating doors of these, because it really gives a sense of like what's happening on the outside of this room is also a present thing. And so when you see people coming in from off stage and then coming through the door, you see them before they come through the door, right? There's a fantastic acting exercise called, before coming through the door. And, you do this in drama school, always in the training, but it really applies to this set. And I think in the original production, I think it was intended to really expose the idea of like, well, how are people before they come into the room, and then what are they playing when these characters come into the room? What are they playing? Are they two-faced? Are they not? So I think it really kind of harkens back to that commedia dell'arte idea. And so yeah, it's this floating walls and a sort of a floating set, and I think it's really, it just allows for a lot of flexibility in how I want to tell the story.
We've been fortunate to have you at the Jacobs School of Music directing at the Opera Theater several times now. What do you enjoy about working with pre-professional singers, actors, and what are some of the limitations or even the advantages?
I think that the program here has a huge amount of talent in the pool of singers that they bring. I'm always impressed with the level of preparation. I'm impressed with the ability to make the jump from not understanding something to completely understanding it in a very short amount of time. And they're also some of the hardest working students I've ever worked with. I think that they don't see themselves as students, they see themselves as people who want to get more knowledge because they want to be professionals. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I think that that's something that the school really encourages in them. It's clear that that's the philosophy. And I think that it's so nice to walk into a room where everyone remembers the staging that you did yesterday. And that you can't take that for granted, because sometimes in the professional world that's not always the case. So I really enjoy the energy that they bring. I also think that this story really is mostly about young people, and they are the perfect age. They're playing the ages the characters should be. Susanna and Figaro should be 19 or 20, and you'll never see that on a professional stage. So actually, I find this to be a really great opportunity for me to experience the Marriage of Figaro with people in the ages that they should be. It's really exciting because it reminds you how it sort of amplifies the situation comedy and looking at like, wow, the Count has only been married 3 years and he's behaving in this very erratic way. Oh yeah, he's a 21-year-old who's bored, right? And so it's, when you're reminded of that, I think it really makes the piece into something different. And I think when people come see it, they will see that youthful energy and rethink everything they thought they knew about the Marriage of Figaro if they know the piece.
Mm-hmm. To wrap things up, what would you say is the most enduring part of the character of Beaumarchais' Figaro, and why is he so everlasting in theater, especially opera?
I think his personality, I think that he's meant to represent the everyman, and audiences latch onto that immediately in what he says, how he behaves, how he moves. Again, the way he moves is very inherent in how he's written in both the play and the opera, physically. And I think that he is a constant reminder about the underdog who is able to see through the gauze of phoniness or something fake, right? And I think that that's why he endures, is because that constant reminder of the underdog being able to win the day, and that's a heroic, I think, character that people want to latch onto over the centuries.
Crystal Manich, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Backstories, and we look very much forward to your direction of our production of The Marriage of Figaro.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.